reserve tank this time of year in so many different ways. We could use a reserve tank in different aspects of our life. And, I think back to the beginning of the year when you could walk into any gym in St. Tammany Parish and see people lined up waiting for exercise machines. But if you go back to that same gym in November, what do you see? No lines, open machines, nobody waiting to have that. Of course, I see that through the window because I let my gym membership run out and I don't have one. But our energy levels, our commitments, our bank accounts, our gym memberships, our get up and go, all seem to dwindle this time of the year. For some of us, it's because we need a vacation. Our vacation was too many months ago, and we could certainly use one right now. For some of us, it's because we're wrapping up the fiscal year at work. For some of us, it's the decreasing temperature and the increasing wind speeds that make us ache. For some of us, it's because we worked 2 funerals in a row and had to write a sermon for today. Whatever it is, we need a reserve tank. And in appropriate fashion, there are often times we need a reserve tank for faith as well, for our belief and our following of Jesus Christ. Our faith has run out. I often warn people not to get too top-heavy with our faith. By that, I think of my Saint Bernard. I have a big dog at home that if I feed too much, her knees are going to give out and she becomes top-heavy. She just kind of falls over. And there's times that she eats too much and she just can't get up off the floor and she gets a little top-heavy. And I think about in our faith how sometimes we can get a little top-heavy with our faith. There's a certain time in every year that some of us might have a faith high, a time in which we are on that mountaintop. And the rest of the year we look forward to being on that mountaintop. But the rest of the year we're down here in the valley. We can't seem to get back to where we were. And for a lot of us that feels this way. I think of youth groups when they go off on retreats or on mission trips and they come back and they're on this God high. They can't wait to get back to that retreat or back to that mission trip because they've been there with God, but it's hard to see God in it every day. And so yes, faith can leave us wanting a reserve tank or simply waiting for God to show up the way that God shows up on those mountaintop experiences when we were on our faith high. And waiting is hard. Waiting works on the nerves, on our patience, and provides times of stress beyond our own comprehension. And in today's gospel lesson, Jesus encourages us to have patience, to show God to others, and to also be willing to share our own faith resources. Let us listen for Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. However, if you would like to follow along in the New International Version, you can find it in your pew Bible on page 702. Listen for this, the Word of God. The kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps, and they went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and fell asleep. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here comes the bridegroom. Come out, let's meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly, I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, when I was in seminary, they would bring a few of us into a room, and they lit an oil lamp in the background, and we didn't really pay attention to this oil lamp at first, but it purposely been emptied and trimmed so that it would go out. And as they talked, the light got smaller and smaller and smaller. And they began to remind us that we as ministers would be asked to be the light of the world for groups of people like yourselves. But if we weren't keeping our oil filled, whatever that oil was, then our light wouldn't shine for very long. If we ran out of energy, if we ran out of whatever it is that kept us going, then we wouldn't shine for very long. And I remember one of our professors, a woman by the name of Anna Carter Florence, reminded us that on an airplane, we are asked to put on our own oxygen mask before we are helped to help someone else. We too must be willing to share both our light as well as our oil. We must be willing to share all that we are to others. And I looked down yesterday at these candles, and these candles that were burning out as I preached about my friend Annie were starting to burn out. I lit the candles well before her service yesterday, but soon they were barely flickering because the oil was running out. And I think that was Annie kind of giving me a hint, because I had been going, I'd worked for maybe 12 or 13 days in a row. And so before I finished my sermon, I went home and I relaxed with my family. As I came and before I went out and started putting together the pieces of this sermon, because I had no energy left. And I knew before I preached to you this morning, I needed to find my reserve tank. And luckily I found it hanging at home with my family. I found that reserve tank enough to just get by and to finish putting the pieces of this sermon together. And in this morning's gospel lesson, Jesus is telling us to be prepared to see God at all times. Be prepared. But sometimes we just get tired of waiting. In the parable, all of the bridesmaids, all of them fell asleep. But for some reason, the ones who were without oil were called the foolish ones. They were the ones that brought their reserve tanks, were the ones who were able to be in the presence of the bridegroom. And this is difficult to hear because we see that both of them were at fault. Both of them fell asleep. But the ones that were called foolish were the ones who had gotten top-heavy. They had used all of their oil and all of their life at the beginning. They had left without a reserve tank. And in our lives, it's easy for us to point fingers at those who are unprepared and call ourselves the prepared ones. Well, we're here this morning, so everybody else must be unprepared. We're ready for God if God comes. And people can often talk about the second coming and the hour in which Jesus has come. People have made millions, if not billions, of dollars selling books and propaganda, scaring people into a right way of living out of a sense of fear rather than a sense of negativity. They often showed up on my college campus and had a note crate with them. But we are made afraid of being left behind if we aren't prepared. But we need to learn one thing. This isn't about how prepared we are. This isn't about how aware we are. This isn't about us at all. This is about the bridegroom. A wedding is never about the guests. A wedding is never about the guests. This isn't about the prediction of end times or who is in or who is out. This is about the willingness of God's people to see God in every moment. This isn't about a single moment of God walking by and us missing God because we look the other way. No, my friends, this is about us recognizing God in this world today. This is about what kind of fuel it is that we are burning. This is about our not becoming so top-heavy with a single moment of heavenly bliss, that one mountaintime experience, that we miss God in the everyday. As I mentioned, the last 2 days of this church were very tough. As we said goodbye to both Noble Moth and Annie Fredericks, two of our loved ones in this church. And in both services, we read, as you can expect, the 23rd Psalm. And if you ever read the 23rd Psalm, which I'm assuming some of you have probably read the 23rd Psalm before, we were reminded that God lives with us as much on the mountaintop as in the valley. God's presence is not one that we can force here or there. God's presence is one where God's presence will show up. But also hear this. God's presence is not something we are waiting on. This isn't about a second coming. This is about God's presence with us here and now. This is about seeing God as well as showing God. I will say that again. This is about seeing God as much as showing God. The foolish bridesmaids wouldn't have been as foolish if the other bridesmaids were willing to share their oil. But more importantly, the other bridesmaids could have shared their light. They could have shared their light. What was stopping them from taking their lamps and saying, well, walk beside me as we go and see the bridegroom? Yes, imagine had they shared their light, then all could have seen. All could have been seen by the bridegroom. My friends, if you are waiting to see God in your midst, light your lamps. God has been here the entire time. But hear this, you are not alone in your waiting. People all around this world are waiting for God to show up. People all around this world are waiting for God to be made real to them. Yesterday at Amy's funeral, we read a portion of Matthew 25 that tells us that if we're willing to do for the least of these, the hungry, the thirsty, the lonely, then we are willing to do it for God. Those who may not recognize the bridegroom are not foolish at all. They're simply waiting for us to fill their oil. Or more importantly, they're waiting for us to bring our light to them. Those of us who are waiting, those of us who are sometimes missing the bridegroom, are not foolish at all. We're simply not using the reserve tanks that have been there the entire time. For some, that oil may look different than others. For the hungry, that oil is food. For the lonely, that oil is joy. For some, it is family. For some, it is friends. For all of us, we all seek light. All of us seek a light that we call love. My friends, the bridegroom is coming. The bridegroom is here. The bridegroom has been here. Wake up, share your oil. Wake up and share your light. And share the good news that God is, was, and will always be in our midst. Amen. We now celebrate that same God. We celebrate the ministry of this church. We celebrate all of those around us.